following was reported in the South Wales Echo on the 16th of March, 1897. Quote, "The Secretary of State for War on Monday promulgated a special Army order, making known to the Army the substance of a report received from the General Officer commanding at the Mauritius, recording the remarkable courage and exemplary discipline displayed by the troops under most trying circumstances on board the Royal Indian Marine Troopship Warren Hastings, when that ship, steaming full speed, struck the rocks."
Hello, and welcome to the Shipwreck Archive.
Thank you. Would you happen to have the story? An organized escape from the Warren Hastings.
Here we are. Enjoy!
The Warren Hastings was a steel-hulled twin-screw steamer built in 1893. The 4,500-ton ship was built specifically for troop transport from the designs of the famous naval architect Sir Edward James Reed. She had accommodations for 1,000 troops, 29 officers, and 6 ladies, and exceeded the contract speed of 16 knots at sea trials, reaching a speed of 17 knots. Everyone had high hopes for the new ship's career. She went and took her place as a Royal Indian Marine Troopship and spent the next few years of her life uneventfully. In December 1896, the Warren Hastings received the task of carrying the 1st Battalion King's Royal Rifles to Cape Town, and Mauritius from India, and the 2nd York and Lancaster units to Mauritius. On the 10th of December, she set sail from Bombay under the command of Commander Holland with the King's Royal Rifles, and she landed 4 companies of the Rifles in Cape Town on December 28th, keeping 4 more companies of the Rifles on board. Here, she also took on board 4 companies of the York and Lancaster regiments, and on January 6th, she departed for Mauritius. In total, she now had 1,246 people on board. She was full to the utmost capacity. On the 14th of January, their journey would come to a swift and sudden end, one that would make people think of the Birkenhead, and boast that such calm discipline still existed on troop ships. The night of the 13th going into the 14th was a dark and stormy one. There was a heavy rain and an equally heavy surf. It is possible that the visibility had been also impacted by volcanic ash. The nearby Piton de la Fournaise, a volcano on Reunion Island, was very active at the time. Commander Holland would also say that he had been told by the officer on watch that due to the heavy rain, it was impossible for them to take observations to determine their exact location. Commander Holland was confident in his previous observations taken at 3 in the afternoon, though, and since the current in the area always ran strongly southeast, and he knew their speed was 12.5 knots, he believed that he still knew exactly where they were. Even if they did go off course, the greatest navigational hazard to them in the area would be Reunion Island, which was an island with steep cliffs, and, therefore, easy to spot from a distance. It would be easy for them to correct their course in time, even if it was not completely correct due to the poor weather. Commander Holland would prove to be mistaken. Without anyone noticing, the Warren Hastings had gone 8 miles off course. At 2:20 in the morning of the 14th of January, 1897, the Warren Hastings heavily struck the rocks off of the coast of Reunion Island. Due to the poor weather at 2 in the morning, Commander Holland had gone to stand on the bridge, as had the navigating officer named Lieutenant Walker. They joined Lieutenant Wyndham, who was the officer of the watch. All 3 men would later report that they had a shared illusion that visibility was better than it was, and that they could see at least a mile in the distance. They would only find after the vessel struck that in reality, a visibility of less than 60 yards. The 3 officers on the bridge had seen nothing ahead of the ship to warn them of the rocks, nor had they heard of the waves breaking due to the sound of the heavy rain. There would be 2 things for the people on the Warren Hastings to be thankful for. Though they did not know it yet, the first was where they had grounded. They were near the mouth of a stream with an active fishing community nearby. For the people of St. Phillipe, it was a rude awakening. The crash of the ship hitting the rocks woke many of them up, but once they saw what occurred, the fishing population quickly mobilized to offer what aid was needed. They would later say that when they had reached the shore, they had found a ship on the rocks with all of her lights burning, but there was not a single noise they could hear from the ship to suggest people were on board. It was only when they hailed the ship from the shore that they were answered with the sound of a bugle to let them know that their assistance would indeed be required. Had the ship struck at a place even a short distance away in either direction, it would have been much more difficult to reach them from the shore. The second fortunate thing was a high speed at which the ship had been traveling. Rather than strike her side on the rocks and then sink, she was instead driven up onto the rocks, which prevented her from sinking without a chance of escape. The moment the ship came to her jarring stop, the engine crew reversed the engines, but Commander Holland quickly sent them a message to instead go at full speed ahead to drive the ship more firmly up onto the rocks. The wells had been sounded soon after the ship struck, and he already knew that the ship was taking on water quickly. Not only that, but taking soundings around the ship had told him that, while there was hardly any water under the bow of the Warren Hastings, there was deep water to her stern. And Commander Holland wanted to avoid the possibility of the ship slipping and sinking stern first off of the rocks with the people still on board. Commander Holland next ordered that the watertight compartments be closed, the pumps be put to work, and the ship's boats be cleared for evacuation. As for the troops on board, when Lieutenant Colonel Forrester Walker, the man in charge of the troops, came to the bridge to see what was needed to be done, he was told to have the troops fall in on the lower deck. Commander Holland wanted them to be ready to evacuate, but he wanted the upper deck free for the crew to work. Commander Holland also sent the word for the women, children, and the sick to be ready to come on deck at any moment in case they needed to evacuate in a hurry. He estimated that with the crew working as efficiently and calmly as they did, it took about 6 minutes to ready the boats. But he soon after changed his mind and gave the order for the boats to be secured again. With the rough sea pounding on the rocks, and the ship bumping constantly on the rocks with the waves, Commander Holland decided it would be impossible for anyone to leave the ship in the boats safely, and he was worried about them being destroyed before they could find a use for them. During all this time, nothing could be seen from the bridge still, and so about half an hour after they collided with the rocks, the 2 lieutenants who had been standing on the bridge with Commander Holland went to see the bow to see if they could spot anything that would be of help. They came back and reported that the bow was driven close to some large rocks that they should be able to reach with ropes. At 3:15 a.m., Commander Holland ordered Lieutenants Wyndham and Dobbin to get lanterns and scout out the rocks. With the light of the lanterns, it was discovered that the rocks would make a very practical landing stage for the troops on board. At 4 a.m, it was decided that they were as ready as they could be, and the order was given for the troops to begin to leave the ship and climb onto the rocks. Commander Holland was still hoping that his ship would last until daylight, and therefore he did not give the order for the women, children, or sick to leave the ship yet. That lasted until about 15 minutes into the evacuation, when the ship started to heel over to starboard at an alarming angle, meaning that walking on the deck now required holding onto ropes or the railing. The engineering crew, which up until this point had been staying in their stations to keep the ship driving up onto the rocks, were now forced to retreat, as the engine room and aft stokehole were filled with water. The forward stokehole had been abandoned soon after the ship had hit the rocks due to the water coming in, and the watertight compartment had been shut off. With the ship now listing, Commander Holland gave the order for everyone to come to the deck. He would later say that if anyone had panicked, that would have been the end, especially with the need for people to cling to railings to cross the deck at this point. But everyone remained calm and followed orders. Indeed, when the ship started to list, and Commander Holland gave the order for the men to stop disembarking so that the women, children, and sick could be passed overboard to the rocks, the troops immediately parted so that there would be a path. It was only once this was done that the troop evacuation continued. Around 5 in the morning, as daylight began to be seen, they could see where there was some land about 30 yards away, and the water seemed smooth in the area. Motivated by the spar deck of the starboard side of the Warren Hastings now being under water, as well as the increasing chaos on the rocks that they were evacuating onto, Commander Holland gave the order that anyone who thought themselves a good swimmer could swim for the land after lowering themselves off of the ship. The chaos on the rocks was still not due to any panic or disorder, but rather because people sometimes slipped and fell, and then often people would have to pull them from the water or swim after them to save them. Commander Holland would later complain that he wanted to document and give credit to the men who had saved lives at this time, but many of the men simply refused to step forward and accept any thanks, meaning that he was mostly dependent on what other people told him and what he had seen with his own eyes. One man whom Commander Holland would report had saved at least 5 lives was Lieutenant Wyndham, the first man to have gone over the side at the start to scout out the rocks. Now that the order had been given for those who knew how to swim to head for shore, Lieutenant Wyndham chose to go first. With him, he brought a rope, creating a lifeline for people leaving the ship to travel down. This was credited with having saved many people, as well as allowing the evacuation of the sinking Warren Hastings to go even more smoothly. The local fishermen were also still hard at work in their boats, helping people who could not swim safely reach the shore, as well as trying to help the people on the shore be more comfortable. It was at this stage that the only 2 casualties occurred. 2 men, one of them a cook, and the other a servant, employed by one of the officers, had decided to take the risk of swimming to shore. Both of them were poor swimmers, and they were not able to be rescued. Through all of this, Commander Holland had been standing on the bridge with Lieutenant Colonel Forrester Walker by his side, but he now requested that the Lieutenant Colonel also depart for the shore to take command of the troops, and ensure that order was maintained. Commander Holland would follow not long after. By 5:30 in the morning, there was no longer anyone left on the Warren Hastings. At 6 in the morning, the Warren Hastings seemed to stabilize a little on the rocks, and Commander Holland gave the order for some men under the command of the first lieutenant to salvage what they could with an emphasis on provisions, since the community they found themselves in would not be able to support the sudden influx of 1,200 unexpected guests. This continued until 10, when the first lieutenant reported that it was no longer safe to be on board the ship. Commander Holland was worried that some of the men would try to return to the ship to get left behind possessions and put themselves in danger, and ordered sentries be placed near the ship. It was not an unreasonable concern. Everyone who had been on the Warren Hastings had been forced to leave everything behind. Almost half of the men who found themselves on shore were not even wearing shoes. St. Phillipe was not a large place. full of fishermen, and with a population of only about 1,600, the landing of the people from the Warren Hastings almost doubled the population of the community. During the salvage work, Commander Holland had a telegraph sent to British consul in St. Denis, informing him of what had occurred and requesting assistance. But, in the meantime, the people of St. Phillipe were quick to step up with what they could. It was reported that people were taking off their own clothing to clothe the shipwrecked and sharing what food they could. The women and children were all housed by Monsieur Colon, an ex-gendarme who refused any payment. The sick were taken to the local church. The soldiers were unfortunately forced to bunk in sheds and outbuildings, though there simply was not enough space in a community that did not have any hotel or inn for so many people in better accommodations. The day after the wreck, the men who had saved their boots, and the women and children, departed for the larger town of St. Pierre. The remaining people were forced to wait until boots could be sent for them. It was not a short march to undertake without any footwear. 11 men were also left behind to try to save what luggage and supplies they were able to, now that the Warren Hastings was quickly being beaten into pieces by the waves. At St. Pierre, the men reported that they were met with as much kindness, with people eager to offer them any assistance they could. One man reported that he had tried to insist on paying a barber who shaved him, only for the man to flatly refuse, insisting that he would take nothing from the shipwrecked. Arrangements were quickly made by the British government, and the men were taken by rail to Port de la Pointe, where they were put on board the steamer L'Alpura, headed for Mauritius, as they had originally intended. The men from the Warren Hastings, as they steamed away from Reunion Island, paid tribute to the kindness they had met with by having their band play the Marseillaise, while many of the soldiers climbed up the yards and rigging of the L'Alpura to cheer. A large crowd from the shore, who had come to see them off, responded with cheers of their own. The loss of the Warren Hastings would not be without consequences for Commander Holland. Though everyone gave him credit for the excellent behavior of himself and his men after the wreck, Commander Holland was given a severe reprimand for the navigational error that had led to the wreck in the first place. The men from the Warren Hastings argued that the fault had to lay with the compass, and put forward a theory that the particles from the nearby erupting volcano might be to blame. What if they had been magnetically charged? It was a theory that gained some traction in some of the newspapers, but it did not do much to sway the courts from placing the blame on Commander Holland. The officers under Commander Holland were found innocent of any wrongdoing, however, and the men from both the troops and the ship's crew were put forward for public recognition and awards for their gallantry in a situation that could have been so much worse if there had even been the slightest panic.
For more information, please see the London Times from Monday, March 28, 1897, or see other sources in the description below.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you for visiting the Shipwreck Archives. See you soon.